Okay, great. So good morning, and thank you for letting me join you today. My name is Britt Miller. I am the WISE Relationship Manager on the DPI Customer Service team. And today I'm going to be going over some resources for WISE data and WISE Dash to help you with your review process of homeless data at the district level. So this is what the agenda is going to look like for this presentation. I'm going to go through three of the WISE review applications. So that is the WISE Data Portal, WISE Dash for Districts, and WISE Dash Public Portal, and where specifically you can find homeless data. So it's most helpful for you during your review process within each of these three systems. First, I'm going to start with the WISE Data Portal. I know many of you may not have access to the WISE Data Portal, and that's okay. I did, however, want to bring to your attention that there is a Student Homeless Program Association export in WISE Data that I think would be really helpful for you to be aware of and use. This export is specific for reporting homeless program records that are submitted in WISE Data. Asking your district's data specialist for this report periodically will give you an idea of what students' homeless data is making it from your local SIS to WISE data, and how that record data is being submitted. This export can be used to verify counts for each nighttime residence type or unaccompanied youth. It can also be used to confirm that the correct begin and end dates are being submitted for the students' homeless records to ensure that they're being represented accurately in your data. So this is what the export looks like. So if you're trying to coordinate with your data specialist, this is where it is. It's under the programs, and then it's specifically the Homeless Program Association. And then once you have the export file, it looks like this. So you can see that it's got that program name, begin and end dates of these records, the primary nighttime residence. I picked I'm providing an example here that's got a few different options so you can see how those come through, and then whether or not they are an unaccompanied youth. This export can also be continuously updated as often as data is pushed from your local SIS to WISE data with newly created records or updated records. So you may want to work out a schedule with your data specialist that works best for you for reviewing this data and making sure that it's pushing over as expected and reporting correctly throughout the school year. If you do review this export and see something is being reported incorrectly, that gives you a clue that what's being entered into your SIS is either missing or it isn't making it to the WISE data portal. So this can happen for a variety of reasons. This can be a data entry issue on the SIS side, or it can be a data flow issue if you have something submitted that's not getting pushed over to WISE data. That can kind of give you an idea of where you need to start troubleshooting to get the data submitted correctly. But this, at least looking at this export, gives you an idea of what's actually making it to WISE data. So it'll give you a clue as to what's going to be reported when we start looking in WISE Dash. Now, once the data is submitted into WISE data and it looks correct and you want it to push over to WISE Dash for districts, it will do so on a nightly schedule. The first resource I want to show you in WISE Dash for districts is the enrollment homeless by subgroups graph. And I do apologize, I couldn't do a live demo of this because WISE Dash doesn't have a UAT environment. So I did try to include as many helpful screenshots in this presentation as possible. But if you do have any questions, we can talk about that afterwards. So this is the enrollment homeless by subgroups graph. I did list the kind of thread. So if you do have access to WISE Dash for districts, I kind of showed you where you can find this in the application. And these are going to, again, be helpful for reviewing your homeless data as being reported correctly. There are three different graphs that you can view in this area: homeless students by year, homeless students by nighttime residents, and homeless unaccompanied youth. Again, these are great ways to verify count totals and make sure that the data is coming over correctly. If you see count totals here that don't look correct, this is, again, another way for you to know that you need to request the homeless export from WISE data so that you can see what's being reported there to figure out where the issue in the data reporting is coming from. Now, let's say that you are looking at these graphs and something doesn't look right. Here in this example, we can see that there are 9 students reported with an unknown value. Obviously, we want to figure out what's going on with these students. Why are they unknown? We want to correct those values. and get them reported accurately. All of the graphs in EHCY for districts are interactive. So all we have to do in EHCY is actually click this graph, and it is going to bring up the student list for those 9 students. Now, again, because these are screenshots, we have to protect student privacy. So I have masked the information here, but if you were to click anything in your system, those names and student information would all populate for you. So I then scroll all the way to the right of this graph, past some of the additional information that those students have, and I can see the reported value for nighttime residents, and I can see that it's reported as unknown. I can also, in this example, see that they are also an unknown for unaccompanied youth. So that gives me 2 items that I want to make sure I follow up with these student records to make sure that I'm taking a look at and getting correctly updated in your SIS. Now, there are only 9 students listed here, which isn't too many, but say that you work in a larger district and this list might have up to 100 students, if not more. To make it easier, you have the ability to download the list of students straight out of EHCY. You can do that by clicking the send button here in the student list in EHCY. It's the second one in, and it'll give you the ability to download an Excel spreadsheet so that you can filter, disaggregate, color code, however you would like to use that data that makes the most sense for you. And then you can ask your data. Oh, I'm sorry. And then once you do your investigation, you figure out those missing values, you update those unknowns in your SIS, you can push those to WISE data, and you can ask your data specialist to pull you a newly validated homeless export file to ensure that those updates made it to WISE data. Or you could just wait until the next day when WISE Dash will update with what's reported in WISE data to see if those updates have made it in. So just another kind of like good track for you to be aware of where the data goes and how it gets updated. And then this is a good way for you to kind of do some cleanup and investigation if needed. Next, I want to let you know that there are specific homeless status filter options in all of the WISE for district topics. So along the top, you can see that we have a number of topics available in WISE under the topics tab. The main topics shown here and the assessments are all going to have a homeless status group by option. So this is listed towards the, oh, sorry about that. This is going to be listed under this blue filter data. There's a group by option here at the top, and there is a homeless status here that you can select, and that will show you just specifically students that fall under that homeless status. There is another option under coursework, graduation, and student growth. It's not going to be under the group by option up at the top. There is a different homeless status towards the bottom, and here you're going to pick specifically which status you would like to review those topic information for. I'm not really sure why these are different, to be totally honest. I think it's just the way that the data is disaggregated within WISE but I wanted to make you aware of the 2 different options in case you were trying to review something and you weren't seeing this group by here. So I wanted to let you know that there are those 2 different options available for you under any of those main topics. And lastly, in WISE for districts, I wanted to show you the snapshot dashboards. I'm not sure how much you work in the snapshots dashboards specifically, but I thought it was important to at least make you aware of the filter options here in case you wanted to verify any of this information prior to the December snapshot, since the data being used and submitted in the snapshot is used for federal and state reporting along with the district report cards. When looking at any of the snapshot dashboards, you will have the option to pull over the homeless filter from the available data crosstabs. And this is going to be available in all of the snapshot dashboards. They're going to have these useful little crosstabs over here. And I believe homeless is just kind of down below grade a little bit. So you just pull it over. It's a kind of a drop and drag situation, and then it will populate those counts for you. In the example we're looking at here, it will show you the count for the reported 3rd Friday of September students. You can also use this same view to review your October 1 child count or review the homeless status at the end of the school year under the year-end snapshot if you'd like. You can also use these dashboards to compare your homeless count this year versus what was reported last year. Green dashboards are for data currently being reported for the snapshot that's being taken this December, and purple dashboards are for the data that was captured in last year's snapshot. So I did make a note of that here so you can be aware of those different colors and what they mean. But again, I'm not sure how much you really do with the snapshot dashboards, but I just wanted to make you aware that this resource is available if you ever wanted to take a look. Now, before we jump into the EHCY public portal, I want to make a note that there is limited homeless data available here due to student privacy. Much like economic disadvantage status, we view homeless status as a protected value, and we want to protect students that are in these scenarios from public identification. So there are many times where the data is redacted if it's too easily identifiable within a district or school. Obviously, this means none of the graphs in EHCY public are interactive, and they will not provide student lists if that happens. And there will be times again where if you are disaggregating the information so far down that I believe the threshold is 20, if you have less than 20 students being represented in the group, they just won't show at all with any value, because again, that's too easily identifiable within a community. So I just want to make you aware of that if you're looking at the public portal, as this is open to the general public. So it's not as specific as the EHCY for districts data. However, there are a handful of graphs including under enrollment that you can view. If you scroll down on the page, you can see the percent of students experiencing homelessness, primary nighttime residents, and unaccompanied youth data. I did just take a screenshot of one of them really quick because they were kind of scattered on the page. So, but this is generally what they look like. These graphs will default to statewide data, so you will have to go under that filter data button and pick a specific district if you wanted to look specifically at either your district or another district that you were curious about. But you do also have the ability to compare districts. So what we looked at in the last slide was just under general enrollment, but we do have an enrollment comparison option as well, where you can compare two districts' homeless data against statewide, or you can compare them to each other. So in this example, I've selected two districts to compare. If I were to hover over both of these graphs, I would see what percentage of the entire district's population is reported as homeless and what that homeless count total is for each of these two districts. And this would be helpful when viewing how your district compares to the state as a whole, or if you just wanted to see how your district is experiencing student homeless compared to another district located near you or that has a similar size to you.
Britt, I want to just let you know there are some questions in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them are from the previous slide. So
Okay.
I wanted to jump in with those quickly. So someone is asking, can we get into this data ourselves? And I think this is from the running the report. So, or does someone from the district with EHCY get this data?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So you would have to request and be approved EHCY for district access at your district level. EHCY public portal is available to everyone, so you don't need special access for that. That's why I was saying that some of the information is redacted and it's not going to provide student lists. But EHCY for districts, you do have the ability to request from your district administrators for reviewing that information. And I do think that would be a good idea if you don't already have that, because again, it just has a lot of really good data review pieces for you to kind of take a look at what's being reported and make sure that everything looks correct. So that would be the EHCY access. And similarly with EHCY data, I'm not sure if you would be approved for EHCY data portal access, just because there's not a ton of homeless information in there outside of that Excel spreadsheet. But I did want to make note that that's available to you as well. So I think you can just ask for the EHCY data export whenever you need it, but I would highly recommend having the EHCY access assigned.
Yeah, and I just want to note to everyone too, it's been a little while, but a couple years ago, we did send out from the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program a memo to district administrators and homeless liaisons, encouraging homeless liaisons to have the access in in WISE- for districts to be able to check those things, like exactly what Britt was talking about. And that's something we can look into doing again with staff turnover to see if the homeless liaisons can have that access again. But I think really we just wanted you to know it's available so you could ask for it too. Okay,
Yeah,
and then, sorry, there are more questions.
Yeah, I'm taking a look. I don't think that the data is available regionally, like by CESA. CESA is not a value that we collect in WISE data, so there wouldn't be any way for us to disaggregate the information by CESA specifically. So unfortunately, we don't have that as a filter option. And depending on where you're looking, if you're in WISE- for districts and you have that user role assigned to you, that is going to be specific to the school district that you work for. If you help more than one district, you would need to have access assigned at each district level. So you may have more, but again, that would be district specific. We don't really have a CESA filter value because that's just not something we collect at the district level. The snapshot date is December 6th. Thank you for someone who put that in as well. Is this how DPI gets LEA numbers for McKinney-Vento counts? Yeah, so it all comes down to that homeless program record. And that's why I made the note about the begin and end dates and that WISE data export, because those are going to be important to make sure that those begin and end dates are within that current school year and that they're being submitted correctly for those third Friday counts. Not necessarily that you need it to review for the snapshot, but because the snapshot is where we get majority of our publicly and federally reported data, having the begin and end date encompassing that third Friday, I think is going to be really important for getting those counts correctly portrayed in your data. Is the public portal something that anyone can view and sort data? So yes and no. It is publicly available, so anyone can go in and look. Anyone can filter things down as far as they want or as the system lets them. But again, if anything is too small of a value, it will just redact that. So you don't have to worry about, again, that student privacy scenario. If you're a small district and maybe you only have a handful of students that have homeless records reported, those handful of students are not going to show after a certain point when the data is being reviewed, because we don't want them to be identified within that public forum. Our local runaway and homeless youth program asks me as the McKinney-Vento liaison for annual data, but could they use the WISE-Public to gather info for all the local school districts? So yes, well, that might be a little bit more specific. We would need to kind of take a look at that specifically, because again, if those values are too small, they're not going to populate, but they would be able to use the public portal to kind of do, let me see if I can find the slide again. So they would be able to kind of break it down in this format. So if they wanted to specifically look at, let's, I don't know, just whatever random district, they would be able to filter option down and they could get something that looked like this. And if they hovered over this, it would give them, you know, like 137 students, let's say, would be the homeless count, and that's 2.1% of their total their district population. So they could get the count like that, but again, if the count is too low, it's just not going to show them anything. So it just depends on what type of local school districts they're trying to review. Okay, so I think I answered all of the questions. Let me know if, oh, no, sorry, I wasn't scrolling down far enough. In WISE for districts, do you need a specific type of access that allows you to view economic data? Yes, there is a specific economic indicator user role if you wanted to see the economic status specifically. There is no specific user role for the homeless information, but if you are a person that also handles the economic status, make sure that that is specifically the user role that you are asking for. Otherwise, just the general user for WISE- will give you access to these homeless resources as well. If not seeing homeless for 22-23, does that mean our Skyward export is not submitting correctly? So if you're not seeing any homeless records for 22-23, I would be curious as to where you're not seeing them. If it's WISE-, that most likely means that data hasn't been submitted to WISE data portal. So I would ask to see that homeless program export in WISE data portal to see if anything is indeed getting to WISE data. And if that export is empty, then yes, you know it's a Skyward issue. That's not, maybe that feature hasn't been, that collection hasn't been turned on yet. So you might want to speak with whoever handles your EHCY process, making sure they're turning on that collection to report. You may want to take a look at how the homeless data is reporting in Skyward. I know that sometimes years can be kind of funky in Skyward. If you submit something under the incorrect year, or if the year dates are off, it might not send for the current school year. And in that case, that would be something that you would want to address with Skyward. But again, that WISE data export is a good thing for you to review to see if we're even getting the data in the first place. And if not, then that lets you know that the issue is on your SIS side. All right, the number in WISE Dash sometimes seems lower than what we have identified. I believe the students only count in WISE Dash for the school who originally identifies a student. So this depends on where you're looking. If I go back in my thing here.
And Britt, I think we can, Claire and I can kind of answer this one too. So
Okay.
because we are aware of this, so what Christy is talking about in the chat, the public portal shows a different number sometimes as a district, for a district total at the end of the year. Then if you're going into your system, someone, either it's you or someone else has that access to the district portal to be looking at numbers. And we do know about this as a program, we know about this. Claire and I are actively trying to work on this to change what's reported publicly. It's also just a process of working with our data team at DPI. So we do know this, and Christy's right, it's because of how the students are counted for the public side. It's not showing any students that's in your district at any time in the year right now. So we are working on making sure that that is showing that number, because we believe it is a more accurate number.
Great, yeah, thanks. And I did also just want to make a note that under the homeless by subgroup enrollment right here, we do have this note in the WISE Dash for districts that says homeless anytime during the school year in any district. So, and that is right on the graph. So if you're specifically looking at this bar graph, it is right there. So you'll see it, but that, if you're looking at this, that could be contributing. And then, as Christine said, they're going to do some more investigation and work with the reporting team to kind of get this managed a bit more for what you're specifically looking for. Okay, so let me go back to where I was. Okay, so I believe we answered this. And then I only have a couple more slides so we can get back to the questions. And then I also just wanted to make note for historical homeless data, there is a link in WISE-Public that will lead you to the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Data Program data page, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Since data prior to 1819 is not housed in WISE-, it can be found on this webpage. Again, I'm sure that you're all familiar with this, but I did want to let you know that this is also linked in public if anyone had any questions about that as well. And then lastly, you can also see data by homeless status in some of the state tests and under graduation high school completion. Again, because the homeless data is so protected, it's not available in a lot of these other topics in the public portal. But these are 3 instances that I'm familiar with where the data option for homeless status is also available. So if you wanted to take a look at some of those state tests, ACT and Forward, and then you can also take a look at the graduation and high school completion in the public portal as well. And then I just had questions, so we will go back to the chat. Let me catch up here. Is there a tree diagram that shows the start to end process for identifying a new student in the district, searching for a transfer student, and steps for sharing out with stakeholders? I wouldn't be able to answer that question. it sounds like that's maybe like the local process part of it that doesn't necessarily pertain to specific reporting. So I'll let Christine.
I'm not aware of anything like that. Again, it might just be a district process. Claire and I can do some digging at DPI though and see what might be helpful.
Great. Is there a reason I'm not seeing any homeless options on WISE Dash? So Amanda, it depends on where you're looking. If you take a look at some of those places that I showed in this presentation and you're not seeing a homeless option, I would recommend submitting a help ticket. It could be, I don't think it would be a user role issue, but you know, unless we can see specifically what you're seeing on your screen, I'm not really going to know specifically what issue you're running into. So if you're not seeing that group by option and homeless status, or if you're not seeing those under the enrollment tab by homeless subgroup, submit a help ticket at DPI, and myself or one of my colleagues on the customer service team can kind of help walk you through anything that you may be missing as far as that. Oh, and it looks like Clara said she may not be in the correct school year. Most of the WISE Dash dashboards will default to the school year that is most relevant. So like a lot of the snapshot dashboards will default to last year because we're snapshotting, you know, 21-22 year end data. But the regular topics ones, I believe, will default to whichever one has the most populated relevant information. So it could definitely be that the school year may be selected wrong. So definitely take a look at that. And you can change the school year under that blue filter data option, just like we were looking for the group by homeless status. So if you click that blue filter data, and then it should show you like a current year or view year, and then you can select the school year that you would like to look at for the data populated. Okay, so it looks like we're caught up on questions, but I am going to stick around for the next little bit in the next portion of this. So if any other questions do come up, I am available.
Thanks.
Thank you all for letting me join you.
I think that means that it's my turn. So let me share my screen and get my slides started up here. All righty, so good morning, everyone. That was really terrific information from Britt, and hopefully you all are able to access that data either directly or from someone in your district. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can use that data for program planning. So I will get through this pretty briefly. For those of you who maybe weren't here yesterday, I'm Patricia Julianelle from Schoolhouse Connection. I didn't really put an introduction slide in here because we all met yesterday, I believe, but just in case. I wanted to just really very briefly suggest to you some national data sources. If you're not familiar with these, I put all of these links on the slides. And again, the slides are available on DPI's website, so you can just click on these. And I'm going to go over just a couple of them really quickly. Voices of Youth Count is the largest national study ever done on unaccompanied youth homelessness in the United States. The original data came out in 2017, and they've been releasing new data snapshots and new topical areas almost every year since then. So if you go to that website, you can find information about youth experiencing homelessness on their own between ages 13 and 17, 18 and over, LGBTQ plus youth, pregnant and parenting youth, rural youth. So there are a number of different things that you can check out there about youth homelessness in particular. The second link is on the other age of the end spectrum, young childhood homelessness. So looking at the prevalence of homelessness in different states across the country of children who are under age 6. So you can take a look at that. The Department of Education has been putting that out. I'm going to jump into Schoolhouse Connections Youth Risk Behavior Survey data in a minute, so I'm going to put that on hold for a second. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the National Center for Homeless Education. They have a great data page where you can look at your own state's data as well as other states around the country. And then Schoolhouse Connection, we also pulled together available data that we could find on school discipline for students experiencing homelessness. A number of states and some nonprofit organizations have examined this in different places around the country. And really everywhere that has looked at it has found that students experiencing homelessness are suspended and expelled at twice the rate of house students. So I throw these national data sources out at you just to give you the opportunity to do some comparisons maybe to what you're seeing in your district or your region or your state compared to what other states are seeing. I did want to let you know that the Voices of Youth Count study that I just mentioned, it looked at a lot of things related to youth homelessness, but one of the findings that I think was the most important was they looked at risk factors for young adult homelessness. And by young adult, I mean 18 to 25. And when they controlled for different factors and they tried to identify what's the greatest single risk factor for a young adult to experience homelessness, they found that it was lacking a high school degree. More so than income level, more so than being pregnant or parenting, more so than issues of sexual orientation or gender identity or race. It was not having a high school degree that was the #1 risk factor. So I think that's just really important for you all to know. If anyone, I'm sure when anyone questions, sort of what's the value of McKinney-Vento, what is it that this program really strives to do? Obviously it's about identification and enrollment and academic success and participation for students experiencing homelessness, but it's also really about preventing young adult homelessness, period, particularly as those young adults are starting their own families. So I just wanted to make sure you know about that. And again, that's in that Voices of Youth Count, which was the first bullet on the last slide. And then the other thing I really quickly wanted to mention was that youth risk behavior survey data that I mentioned. And you can go to that link and you can get all kinds of information. If you're not familiar with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it's run through the Centers for Disease Control, and it's administered around the country to high school students and in some states to middle school students as well, every couple of years. So we were able to crunch that data from states around the country that include a question on homelessness. And we were able to, really look at some of the risk factors that are specific to students experiencing homelessness. Again, if you look at the briefs, you'll see, much more likely to attempt suicide, much more likely to go without food, much more likely to experience bullying, much more likely to be a victim of a sexual assault. So just some really, really stark data about homelessness and the relative risk factors associated with that. But also we could identify disproportionalities. And no surprise here at all, we know that homelessness does not affect every population in the same way. So we were able to identify that students of color were, more or less than 2 times more likely to experience homelessness than white students were. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and questioning students were about 2 times more likely to experience homelessness than students who identify as heterosexual. And then the really big outliers at the bottom of the slide, students who identify as transgender were over 9 times more likely to experience homelessness than those who identify as cisgender. And students who had either been pregnant or had gotten someone pregnant to their knowledge were 10 times more likely to experience homelessness. So just pointing those disproportionalities out to you in a really deliberate and mindful way, because when you're looking at your data, you get numbers about things like attendance and numbers about graduation and identification numbers. But I think it's really important to look at those numbers broken down by some of these other factors as well, because I think that really helps to tease out how you can use the data to actually change and improve your program. Making one change doesn't necessarily affect all populations equally. And obviously it's really important to make sure that we're reaching Black students, Hispanic students, Native American students, LGBTQ students, and pregnant or parenting students in very specific ways. So with that, I'm going to actually stop sharing my PowerPoint for a second because I want to pull something up on the internet and share that with you instead. So bear with me here as I open up my browser, and I'm going to share that with you. Here we go. So I wanted to show you this needs assessment. I'm sure that many of you have needs assessments that you've been using for years for program improvement. I know NCHE has a needs assessment. What we tried to do with this needs assessment, and we actually partnered with the state of Rhode Island on this, we wanted to try to put together a needs assessment that wouldn't take you, 6 months to do. We know that everyone's really busy. You don't have time necessarily to dig into like a really profound program evaluation, as useful and as important as that would be. it's probably not something that many of you really have the capacity to dig into. So we tried to put together something that you could do pretty quickly, and then link this needs assessment directly to actual tangible steps that you can take to try to address some of these needs. So let me just scroll through this kind of quickly, and then I'm going to kind of walk through one example. So again, trying to keep this short, we were thinking, well, what are the most important topics that we want to make sure to hit in a pretty short needs assessment? We do have a long version of this, which has more topics in it, and you'll have the link to that in just a minute as well. But we thought one important thing was liaison capacity. How much time does a liaison actually have to work on McKinney-Vento duties? So that was one topic. Second topic was identification. How are you doing at identifying the students experiencing homelessness in your district or in your school? And again, looking at this not only as a part of overall numbers, but also specific subpopulations. A third topic was outreach and engagement. Just really noting that even as we continue to recover from the pandemic, there's still a lot of McKinney-Vento students who have disappeared. National numbers have gone down by, I don't know, something like 40%. I mean, it's been a horrible just loss of students. So we thought it was important, particularly at this time in our history, to have outreach and re-engagement as a topic. Attendance, I think that one's pretty obvious. How are McKinney-Vento students doing at actually coming to school? Outcomes, obviously, we want to look at things like achievement, graduation, dropout data, et cetera. And then the last one, I believe, is early childhood programs. Just wanting to make sure that we're not forgetting about our young children and the importance of getting them involved in early childhood programs and supporting their readiness to learn. So those were the 6 topics we picked. If you decide to use this in your district, you might say, you know what, I only have time for 2 topics, a semester, and I'm just going to pick 2 and look at those, and that's fine. You can use this however it's helpful to you as a tool. I mean, we intend this just to be a tool for you. You might not find it useful at all, and that's fine too. But we kind of are offering it to you as a tool. So if you're going through the data that Britt just shared, and hopefully you're doing that in partnership with your data specialist in your district or in your school, you should be able to either access these reports yourself if you have that authority, or have someone access it for you and just provide you with the information. So just to give you an example of one topic, I'm just going to jump into attendance. So what we have said here is you can ask your data team to create a report for you, or again, perhaps you have the access to create this report yourself, but in most cases, I would assume you're going to ask someone to help you with this. Can you pull for us, disaggregated attendance data by our students experiencing homelessness over the past 4 years? We suggest going back to 2018-19, just to go back to that pre-pandemic state. Quote unquote normal, so that you have some comparisons and you're not just looking at, the first pandemic year where attendance was, sort of not even really possible to track. So look at that attendance data for all of your McKinney-Vento students disaggregated just by homelessness. Look at it disaggregated by unaccompanied homeless youth, and then look at it by economically disadvantaged students so that you have a comparison point. So that would really just be what you would ask for from your data team. Hey, can you pull these reports for me? Hopefully they will say, yes, we can do that. And then once you have those reports in front of you, we tried to make it pretty simple. We put just 3 questions. Has the attendance rate of your McKinney-Vento students dropped more than economically disadvantaged students or other groups? You might want to look at other groups as well. Again, that's completely up to you. In the long needs assessment, we have a lot more information and questions for you to consider here, but this is just meant to be the quick and dirty version. Has the chronic absenteeism increased? And are you seeing something just sort of out of whack for unaccompanied homeless youth? Are you seeing that their chronic absenteeism is off the charts high, or that their attendance rate is much lower than any other group that you've looked at? So you ask these basic questions to yourself. If you answer yes to any of those questions, then you might want to consider taking some action in your program to try to improve these data points. If that's the case, then you can click on this link. Now, this is specific for using ARP EHCY funds, but you don't have to use ARP EHCY funds. We just basically kind of linked this tool with ARP EHCY because we are getting a lot of questions from districts about, what are some really innovative and cool things that we can do with this funding? But you absolutely do not have to have ARP EHCY funds to do this needs assessment. So if this was an issue for you, you click here, and then it's going to jump. There we go. This is going to jump immediately to this document, which is some ideas for things that you can do to actually meet students' needs. right? So this one is particularly about attendance. You can see here it says improve attendance. So because I clicked on that, I jumped immediately to the attendance document. We have documents on every category in the needs assessment, right? So you can look at ideas for increasing liaison capacity, ideas to improve identification, but in our case, attendance was kind of the issue that we were most concerned about. So boop, we hopped over to this attendance document. And what we've done here is, first we've said, take a look at all the different funding that you might have available. You may have ARP HCY funds, you may not. You may have McKinney-Vento funds, you may not. Presumably most of you have Title I funds. So first we said, take a look at what resources you might have available to do some of these things, because some of these things are going to be very low cost. Some of these things are going to be higher ticket items. And then we said, well, okay, well, here's some things you might be able to do to improve attendance. Here's some things that are quick. We think, at least, not to oversimplify anything, nothing is quick and easy, but quicker and easier than some other things, and things that don't cost a lot of money. And so again, I won't go through all these bullets with you because you can do this yourself, but we tried to come up with an idea. I say come up with, we stole these ideas from other school districts around the country. So we put an idea. If we have a specific example, we'll give you a specific example so that you can see, like, oh, here's another district who's actually doing that. Because we know that sometimes when you're trying to sort of sell an idea to your administration, they like to see that someone else has done it already. We also put in little legal citations, because again, if you're trying to pitch an idea, it's nice if you can say, well, there's something in the law that either requires us to do this or encourages us to do this. So we tried to put in, again, some specific examples, and then some of these little it's the law blurbs. If you think that maybe students aren't attending because of issues around clothing or hygiene, we put in some ideas there. If you think transportation is an issue, we put in some ideas there. Again, we've got some specific examples, and we've got some it's the law blurbs. So again, like I said, I'm not going to go through this whole thing with you, but basically that is the idea of the needs assessment, is that you can go through the needs assessment, see what you think is something that you might want to work on in your district, and then you can pop directly to some ideas for how to address that issue, both some of the quicker and easier ones. And then we also have ideas that, might include hiring a new staff person, or a real investment, maybe in a van, or, things that really are bigger lifts. And you can just look through and see what looks like, hey, that might work in my district, or no, you know what, that's really not going to be appropriate for my district, and that's fine. So that's what that looks like. Let me go back to the PowerPoint again. And again, I appreciate your patience with me hopping around here, but I did want to just kind of show you how that document worked. And I will share my PowerPoint again really quickly. There we go. So again, that's the idea. You're welcome to use this. You're welcome to say, you know what, this isn't going to be useful to me, and that's fine too. Like I said, it's just a tool and something that we wanted to offer to you. A couple of other just kind of general principles that I wanted to mention. As I said, I think it's really important to take a step back and do program evaluation. And I think it's something that we all really struggle to do because we're so busy. I mean, I know in my job working at a nonprofit, particularly with the pandemic, we used to be a lot better at doing this on a yearly basis, really as a team, stepping back, looking at what we were doing well, what we could improve on, what were our real strategic goals to try to increase our impact on students and families. And with the pandemic, a lot of that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and we're just sort of getting back into that now. So I know that it can be really hard to make the time to do this, but I mean, I think it's essential. Definitely remember the disproportionalities that I mentioned. So it's not enough to just say, I'm going to do X to improve attendance, if that's not necessarily reaching the reasons why your Native American students aren't coming to school, or your Latino students, or your Black students. Not that those kids are completely different from everybody else or from each other, but just that it's important to really look at the particular issues that they might be facing and to be addressing those deliberately. I'm not going to go through all of these. I think liaison capacity, I don't need to tell you that liaison capacity is a huge issue, and you're being pulled in a lot of different directions and don't necessarily have the time you need. So I would encourage you to take a look at that topic in the needs assessment, and some of the maybe the legal hooks that we put in our companion document, and some other ways that you can look at kind of convincing your administration that you really do need sufficient time to dedicate to this job. It's a huge job. It's probably one of the biggest jobs in the district, and also one of the most overlooked. So I think that's a big one that I just wanted to let you know that we see that and we understand that. Of course, don't forget your young children. And again, I'm not going to talk about all of these. These are just different things that other districts and schools have mentioned that they've seen a lot of impact from these particular kinds of outreach in terms of increasing educational outcomes, increasing attendance, decreasing discipline, et cetera. So those are just some of the ideas. But what I mostly wanted to get to is if you have any questions, so I can take a look at the chat and you can also unmute yourself. And I did want to provide you with these links. Again, this is on DPI's page. This PowerPoint is on DPI's website, so you can click on the links right there, the short needs assessment and also the full needs assessment that you can directly go to. But let me jump into the chat box. And also if anyone has questions, please feel free to just unmute and make any questions or any comments. You know, if there are things you saw in the needs assessment that you think could be improved, we're happy to make it a living document too. So thank you, Catherine. I'm glad that you like it. That's validating. I don't know. I'd be interested to know if any of you have used any particular kind of needs assessment yourself, or even if you don't want to call it a needs assessment, but any kind of a tool to just help you look at your program, evaluate it, maybe look at areas that you might want to tweak or improve on. If you've used any of that in your own program, I'd love to know, you know, what you've used and how it's worked for you. I'm sure your peers would love to know, because again, if this one doesn't work for you, that's fine. I'm sure there are lots of others out there that might work a lot better. So if there's anything that you've used in your own program evaluation and planning, please feel free to drop that in the chat too. I think that'd be really helpful. And I see Carrie saying, so helpful in grant writing. I will say that a couple of the key points in here, I took from, I reviewed Florida's McKinney-Vento grants a couple of years ago. And as I reviewed their grants, I was able to see, like, you know, what the state was requiring in terms of data. And a couple of the things that I put in the needs assessment, I stole from there, you know, because I think that those were key issues that the state was looking at to kind of say, well, is this program, if we've been funding you for, you know, the last 3 cycles, what have you done with the money? Not really just how have you spent it, but what has it resulted in? What are your outcomes for identification, for attendance, for achievement? So I do think it can be a really important grant tool. Catherine, I see your hand. Do you want to mute yourself?
Sure. I just, do you have any ideas, or I know we talked about like maybe DPI doing like a grant writing type like workshop or something, but I struggle with when writing a grant or like looking at data, like what is something that, what's a good goal and like what's a good like indicator that's actually going to show that we can actually impact. Because like I think I've used like standardized test scores, and sometimes it's not always like, and I understand it's not going to be like a 1 year like thing that changes it, but I don't know if there's other ideas that people have had. I mean, I think attendance is a really great one, but just looking at like those actual like data points that we can measure and that like we can have an impact on.
Oh my gosh, that's a question that we ask ourselves all the time. You know, for ourselves, when we're applying for grants as Schoolhouse Connection, we want to show that our work is actually impacting students in some way, also, even though we're further removed than you are. And I agree with you, things like achievement and graduation are really far out in time. And so it's hard to say that you're going to really demonstrate a lot of improvement on that in a year or even in 3 years. We definitely, I think we look a lot at identification, and, you know, you would know best, you know, where your numbers are and where you think they could be. You know, in some places, a 0.2% increase in identification might be really significant and important. You know, in some places, if you identify 5 more students, you've made a huge gain there. And in other cases, of course, those numbers will be really different. But I think identification is a good one to look at. And again, identification by subgroup. You know, if you're identifying pretty well, let's say, you know, in the elementary and middle school range, but you have 0 unaccompanied youth. Well, I would think that would be a low-hanging fruit. Like, it's pretty unlikely that you have 0 unaccompanied youth, you know, especially if it's year after year after year. So let's say, okay, we're going to do better on unaccompanied youth, and we're going to identify at least 5. Yeah, I don't think you need to say we're going to identify 100. So I think when you look at your data, and that's part of the reason for the needs assessment, I think when you look at it, you'll be able to see, oh, you know, we have, you know, let's say 40% of our school district population is Latino, and only 2% of our McKinney-Vento students are Latino. That's not good. So let's say, okay, we're going to focus on that, and that's a data point that is troubling to us. We know that we really want to focus on equity, so we want to say we're going to find more of our Latino McKinney-Vento students this year. So that's where I think if you do the needs assessment, you'll see, let's be honest, we all of us, myself more than included, we all have a lot of work to do on everything. But I think the needs assessment can help you see what are the red flags that you might not even have ever realized that are really out of whack. Gosh, our unaccompanied youth attendance rate is so low. So I think you'll see those, and those red flags, usually I think it's easier to make some incremental measurable progress over a shorter time period, and kind of focus on those to start with and then take it from there. And we're going to do some action planning later today. So that might be a moment when you say, yeah, you know what, I've really been wanting to work on this, increasing the percentage of our young McKinney-Vento children who are connected to preschool and Head Start. I don't think it's a great idea right now at this moment in history to bite off 10 goals. I think we can bite off 1 or 2 and focus on those because there's just too much going on. Thanks to everyone just kind of chiming in about your opinions on the needs assessment. I appreciate that. Let's see, I want to make sure that I'm not missing any questions. I think I got all the questions. So if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them into the chat at any time, even if it's during the break or lunch, and we can come back to them later. But otherwise, I think, Christine or Claire, if you have anything else to add, but we might even be able to give everybody an extra 6 minutes of break time or something like that.
Yeah, we can. I will say the comments that I typed just to reiterate it, but hopefully looking at the various amounts of funding, I like that within the links within the needs assessment, it does explain there's different funding sources that you might have access to. But Claire and I both also work with Title I and on our Title I team at DPI. And we advocated really hard to have the homeless reservation of Title I funds over the last couple of years. And we both review Title I applications. So we see the amounts of reservations that districts are putting aside specifically for students experiencing homelessness out of Title I funds. So hopefully we want you all to be having those conversations in your district about how can we utilize Title I funds for our homeless students, how much is appropriate to support the students in our district, and maybe looking at a needs assessment might help those conversations or help guide those conversations as you're going through a needs assessment. But we definitely encourage you all to have those conversations, so the person who's not filling out the application is the only one thinking about it and not aware of the actual needs of students experiencing homelessness in the district.